Meanwhile, Scotland's senior law officer has been explaining why the bin lorry driver wasn't prosecuted. The Lord Advocate Frank Mulholland says there was insufficient evidence in law to bring charges against Harry Clark. He also says a private prosecution is unlikely to succeed. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Rival Alderson.
The sea of flowers in the days after the Glasgow bin lorry crash was testament to the devastation felt by the community. The fatal accident inquiry should be able to answer many of the questions raised by the tragedy. But it's only the Crown Office, headed by the Lord Advocate, which can answer the biggest question: why are there no criminal prosecutions? Frank Mulholland says although he understands the anger of those affected, under law a prosecution couldn't have succeeded.
Mr. Clark was unconscious at the wheel. Of the bin lorry. So he's not in control of the bin lorry, so he doesn't have the required criminal intention. Unless you can demonstrate foreseeability. In other words, Mr. Clark, as a result of his ongoing medical condition, must know that he was unfit to drive on that day.
But 4 years earlier, Harry Clark, then a bus driver, had collapsed at the wheel at this bus stop. DVLA hadn't been told, but the Lord Advocate says even this wasn't sufficient to bring charges.
No doctor had told Clark that he was unfit to drive. In fact, no doctor told him that he should notify the DVLA of his 2010 episode. If he'd notified the DVLA of his 2010 episode, the worst that could have happened to Clark was that his licence would have been suspended for 12 months maximum.
The FAI has been told some of the bereaved families intend to bring their own private prosecution, but the Lord Advocate says that won't succeed.
Well, no court will grant authority for a private prosecution unless they are satisfied that there's sufficient evidence in law. The view that Crown Counsel took in this matter, together with all the people that worked on the case, was that there was insufficient evidence in law.
But ultimately, it'll be for the High Court to decide. Rival Alderson reporting, Scotland.
Katrina Renton reports from Glasgow Sheriff Court.
Moved to put Harry Clark's side of the story. He said allegations made about the bin lorry driver in the course of this inquiry were unfair, singling out one accusation that the accident was all your fault. Throughout the inquiry, much has been said about Mr. Clark's medical history, which includes fainting and dizziness dating back 40 years. Mr. Reid said no one had told Harry Clark he had a medical condition that could affect his ability to drive prior to the accident, 3 days before Christmas last year. Then he turned to Mr. Clark's evidence last week and the possibility of a private prosecution. Paul Reid told the inquiry Mr. Clark instinctively wanted to answer the questions that were put, but it was the risk of prosecution that stopped him. He added it was lamentable that Mr. Clark was attacked so readily and so frequently, and that no inference should be drawn from Mr. Clark's decision not to answer some of the questions.
Harry Clark's lawyer told the inquiry he did not set out that morning to inflict that unimaginable loss, nor did he understand there was any risk he would do so. He said he's not the lying and deceitful man that's been suggested by some throughout the course of this inquiry. He said he's a very ordinary man with the failings of ordinary men.
He said Mr. Clark's contribution to the awful events of the 22nd of December 2014 is something he will carry with him for the rest of his days.
Our reporter Katrina Renton's at the site of the crash itself in Glasgow.
The Sheriff today paid tribute to the families who have attended throughout. He said he will not rush to judgment but hopes to have his recommendations ready by the end of January. Now, he also said he hopes that the single most useful outcome of this inquiry is that because of the publicity surrounding it, drivers will now be aware and consider whether they have any medical conditions that will affect their ability to drive safely.